Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Saumur-Champigny and we're looking at the Arnaud Lambert 2019 Terres Rouges Saumur-Champigny. Domaine Arnaud Lambert is the amalgamation of two properties, Domaine Saint-Just, which is the Lambert family domain in Saint-Cyr-en-Bourg in Saumur-Champigny. This was established by Yves Lambert, Arnaud's father, in 1996. And then in 2009, they started working the parcels of Château de Brézé in Saumur. Now combined, they have 40 hectares worth of vines, all of which are farm certified organic. And in Saumur-Champigny, they're working in two communes, Saint-Cyr-en-Bourg, which is in the southern part of the appellation, set back from the Loire River. And then they're also working vines in Montsoreau, which is in the northeast part of the appellation, hugging the Loire River. And then their vines in Saumur are in the commune of Brézé. Now, because we're in Saumur-Champigny today, I'm going to throw out a few quick stats with regards to this appellation. So the AOP was established in 1957. There were 9 original communes. And in terms of the greater Loire Valley, we are in the subregion of Anjou-Saumur. And this is different from Chenin Blanc and Saint-Nicolas-de-Bourgogne, which fall under the Touraine subregion. Now, Saumur-Champigny as an appellation is exclusively for red wines. So if a vigneron wants to make Rosé from their Cabernet Franc race, this would typically fall under the Saumur Rosé AOP. And similarly, if they have Chenin Blanc planted, this would also fall under the Saumur AOP as Saumur Blanc. Now, today's wine is coming from a 2-hectare parcel of vines, around 45 or so years of age, and the lieu-dit is called Le Bois de la Roche, and we are in Saint-Cyr-en-Bourg. So we are about as far south as you can get in the Saumur-Champigny appellation. We're about 6 kilometers or so away from the Loire River, and we're on a gentle west-facing slope here in this vineyard. And we are, there is like just adjacent to the vineyard, there's quite a bit of forested area sort of to the east and northeast. And I would think that that would afford a decent amount of protection from the cooler northerly and northeasterly winds that would come in otherwise. And the vineyard, as I said, is on a west-facing slope, so we do get the benefit of that more intense afternoon sunshine as well. Now, in terms of the soils here, we have about 60 centimeters of a sand, silt, clay mix in terms of the topsoil, sand being about 45% of that composition. And in terms of particle sizes, I always talk about these soils. And in terms of particle size, sand has the largest particle size, and then it goes silt and then clay after that, clay being the smallest. And that's why clay has a certain compactness, a denseness to it, is because it's like the particles are so small that they kind of stick together better. And as a result, a clay holds more moisture, and it's got that sort of compact texture. And then conversely, sand has a slightly larger particle size, so sand typically has much better drainage, and silt is kind of somewhere in between. Now, the subsoil here, we have a sandy silt mix of about 30 centimeters. So we've got a bit of clay in the topsoil, so some good moisture retention in the topsoil. We've got some better drainage kind of in the subsoil here, and then we hit the tuffeau bedrock right after that. So we've only got about 90 centimeters, so 35 inches of topsoil and subsoil here before we hit the tuffeau bedrock. Now, we are on the middle Turonian tuffeau, but what I discovered about this tuffeau, which is new to me, this tuffeau specifically in this part of Saint-Cyr-en-Bourg is referred to as a glauconitic micaceous chalk. And what that means is there's actually a high iron content in this chalk. And as a result, it actually, because of the weathering over time, this chalk actually has a slight greenish tinge to it. And it's known locally as Craie Verte. And this is a sort of a new thing for me, and I'm not 100% certain as to how this impacts the viticulture or the winemaking or the finished wines at the moment. But now that it's on my radar, you can be guaranteed that I'm going to be diving into this Craie Verte to try and understand it a little bit better. In terms of winemaking, though, for this wine, Arnaud takes a very kind of thoughtful, dynamic approach in the cellar. He really lets the vineyard dictate his approach in terms of vinification. And this wine is actually the complement to his Clos Mazeric, which is sort of his entry-level wine from Saumur, and this is sort of a complement to that. So he does take a gentler approach in the cellar in terms of macerations. So this would have been fermented in concrete with indigenous yeast. 2/3 would have spent about 10 days on skins with pump overs twice daily in the first 3 days, and then once daily after that. And then the remaining third was just a maceration through infusion, and that was for about 21 days. So after fermentation, the wine would have been blended and then aged in concrete for about 6 to 8 months before bottling. And then in terms of sulfur usage, Arnaud really kind of refrains from using sulfur as much as possible. So no sulfur during the fermentation, and only just a touch at bottling. So let's get in the wine. Now on the nose, this has a really beautiful kind of savory fruit profile, like foresty berries, like kind of wild black raspberries and kind of morello cherry. There's a little bit of like a currant note, maybe even a touch of cranberry here as well, but very pure fruited, but leans a little bit more savory. And the pyrazines come through as sort of a fresh and dried thyme note. There's a bit of cedar leaves here as well, kind of mimicking that foresty note. And there's also a little bit of a violet note here on the nose as well, which is quite pretty. But the nose, very pure and leans a little bit more on the tartar sort of savory side of the spectrum. Now on the palate, this is really tart, vibrant acidity. All those same fruits come through really nicely on the palate as well. It almost punches a little bit more intensely with this sort of cran raspberry thing going on. And there's a certain juiciness actually to the palate, which is quite nice. Yeah, also on the palate, there's this really distinct sumac note, which might sound a bit odd for some people, but I grew up in a part of Ontario where we had like sumac bushes all over the place, just wild. And I remember as a kid in the fall going and picking the sumac berries off and eating them. And sumac, when it's fresh, has a really distinct profile that's kind of red fruited, but also lemony at the same time. And this wine is kind of doing that for me today. And there's also a really distinct kind of pink peppercorn note as well on the palate, which is really nice. And the combination of the sumac and then the pink peppercorn gives this real kind of energy and vibrancy and this sort of punchiness to the palate, which is really quite kind of exciting in a way. Now, in terms of the tannins, these tannins, very fine, relatively low tannins, but there's a certain satininess to the texture. And all the wines I've had to date from Arnaud Lambert do have this certain satininess with regards to the texture, and it's really quite beautiful. There is a nice chalkiness to the finish, and there is a certain degree of density to the middle palate as far as how it sort of sits in terms of that fruit core and the tannin and the acid. It all kind of hugs the middle of the tongue. It does sit sort of horizontally and also vertically, but in general it does have a really nice sort of dense kind of middle core to this wine. If I had to describe this wine in one word, it would be purity and pristineness. There is a certain energy to this wine that is really translucent in a way, as if you were kind of looking down into some sort of moving body of water, like a creek or a brook or a stream or something, and you could see like right to the bottom. It's so clear, and like the coolness of the water, and you can see sort of the moving water moving over the river stones. And this wine is kind of giving me that today as far as its energy. Is there's a real translucent kind of character to it. It's pure, it's pristine, it's savory, it has that sort of foresty kind of thing going on in terms of the fruits, but it's really quite beautiful. It does have a lot more elegance and finesse to it. This is not a powerful, structured, big wine. This is really about seamlessness, about balance and grace. If you've not had the wines from Arnaud Lambert, I highly recommend seeking them out. They are some of my all-time favorites in Saumur-Champigny, and also Levi Dalton has a great podcast episode dating to the 2017-ish, I think, featuring Arnaud, and that's something worth checking out as well. Now, if you've had this wine before, of course, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.